If you're travelling and adventuring in the 18th century, the time of the American Revolution, the early Napoleonic Wars, and even the late period of the golden age of piracy, what might be better than something like this cutto or short sword for carrying around for self-defence or even home defence or defending a wagon or something like this? Well, the obvious choice has to be a blunderbuss. But what's even better than a blunderbuss? What about a blunderbuss with a flickout bayonet? And what might be better than one blunderbuss with a flickout bayonet, but two blunderbusses with flickout bayonet? Why don't you join me for this video and meet my little friends? Aha, my hearties. Hi, Matt Easton here, Schola Gladiatoria and Easton Antique Arms. Now, hopefully very many of you who are watching this video will have seen the video on Todd's Workshop channel recently where I visited the Pitt Rivers Museum, the amazing Pitt Rivers Museum. There's lots more videos coming on that incidentally, with Todd of Todd's Workshop and Todd Cutler. Now, one of the things that we looked at in the first video were blunderbusses, blunderbusses, I think that's right. It's not a Latin word. So, I have long loved these, and coming off the back of visiting the the Pitt Rivers Museum by pure coincidence in my antique dealing business, because obviously I buy and sell antique arms and armour, and I came across, I was offered in fact a blunderbuss, this exact blunderbuss here, and I have always wanted one. I've always wanted one with a flip out bayonet. We'll look at that in a second, and so I bought it essentially, and I've ended up for two for reasons I won't go into here, but I'm very happy about that fact. One of them I'm going to sell incidentally. But these are amazing things, and these were very popular in Britain. There were equivalent ones found all over Europe and America and even places like India and Afghanistan as well. So we're going to have a little look at the blunderbuss, how it works, and also its place in society in the 17th century, because it's actually quite an important weapon, particularly in civilian defence, more than military, although they were sometimes used in military applications, and we're going to look at why. So what I have here is a blunderbuss from the end of the 1700s, probably between 1780 and 1800, made by Archer of Birmingham. I think it's Thomas Archer, although there were a few different Archers working in Birmingham. For anyone who doesn't know, this is not Birmingham, Alabama. This is Birmingham in England, the original Birmingham, the original generation Birmingham. And Birmingham was absolutely famous for the gun trade. They also made swords as well, but they were perhaps most famous for the gun trade internationally, and Birmingham guns were shipped all over the world. So this is made by Archer of Birmingham. This one is made by Nubly of London. So this is a slightly higher status version than this, and in fact Nubly went on to become an official gun maker of the Prince of Wales, who was the Prince Regent, giving its name to the Regency period, who eventually became George IV, so at the time of the Napoleonic Wars. He also made, in fact both of these made other guns as well, so they made muskets, rifles, pistols, all of the above, and blunderbuss. So let's put the Nubly one down for a second. So what is a blunderbuss? Well, many of you, I think probably most of you watching this channel will know that a blunderbuss is dictated by having a flared end to the barrel. Now, if you watch Bugs Bunny cartoons, then you might be under the idea that this massively increases the spread of the shot. Does it? Well, as always, the answer is nuanced. It depends. Okay, so fundamentally, when shot, if we're shooting, for example, bird shot, like you might shoot out of a 12-bore shotgun at a clay pigeon, for example, as soon as it leaves the barrel, it does start to spread. Okay, because there's a certain amount of gas that forces those things apart, and obviously the whole idea of a shotgun, which is similar to basically what a blunderbuss is, the whole idea is that the shot spreads, it makes it easier to hit your target, and potentially affects a greater number of targets. So the extreme example would be something like a puff gun, which were used for shooting into flocks of birds, and you would fell several of them in one go because the shot would spread all over the place. Now, generally speaking, the spread of the shot is dictated by a number of things. In fact, it's quite complicated, very complicated, so much so, in fact, that you can buy, for anyone who doesn't know, and sorry if I'm teaching you to suck eggs here, but for anyone who doesn't know, you can buy different shotgun cartridges for your shotgun to give different degrees of spread. If you shoot buckshot, for example, where you might only have a very small number of larger lead balls or other material balls, then they don't spread that much. If you shoot lighter shot, it tends to spread wider, and the nature of the wadding pushing behind it can play a part as well. Also the nature of the charge as well. Now I shoot black powder muzzle loaders like this, where we load from the front end rather than putting a cartridge in the back. And something that we notice, if you put more powder in, then it can actually make a donut of, what happens is the wadding blasts its way through the middle of the shot essentially, and the shot spreads out around it. So you end up with a donut, and you can literally, if your aim's really good, you can shoot around the thing you're aiming at, and the shot goes everywhere else. So, without going on too much about shot and shotguns, fundamentally, yes, shot leaving the barrel, depending on how many, what type, how much powder, blah, 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 does spread. Does it spread more because you have a flared end to the barrel? Probably not really. However, this is probably something that we should do more tests on to understand better, because as I understand it, not an awful lot has actually been done about this. Todd and I are of the opinion, as you will notice from the video we did there, that by and large, the wide end to the barrel is to make them easier to load, like a funnel. So it's because you're muzzle loading from the end, to pour your powder or your shot or just to put a pre-made cartridge down is a lot easier, especially if you're bouncing along on a carriage or something like that, or a horse, when you've got a broader end. Does it also have a slight spreading effect? Possibly, slightly, but at the end of the day, this is a very short barrel, so predominantly the shot would spread anyway. If this was a completely parallel tube, the shot would still spread, as we see even with a modern choked shotgun. But the fact that it's a very short barrel means it will spread a lot. However, here's the elephant in the room. At very close range, so when these things are being used, or combat shotguns are being used at 30 yards or less, it doesn't spread very much. So actually you will know that modern shotguns are even used in the military for breaching doors. Yes, okay, they have a special round for it. But when the shot exits the barrel, even if you were using birdshot, it hasn't had time to spread yet. So if you're shooting a target at very close range, all of that shot comes out essentially in one lump. Okay, it's not literally one solid object, but it's very close to each other, so it hasn't spread much. So, these were short-range weapons. They've got short barrels. They don't have a lot of time to generate power behind the shot, but because they're short, they're very easy to carry and store, and they're very manageable in a tight space, even in a ship. I'll come to that in a second. And so therefore, these are great for self-defense at close range. And remember, flared barrel or not, at close range, the shot is not going to have time to have spread much. So, blunderbuss, most famously kind of recognisable by its flared end of the barrel, but it's not usually as flared as something in a Bugs Bunny cartoon. However, there are some examples from places like India and Afghanistan and Ottoman Turkey, which sometimes do have very flared ends to the barrels, more so than this. But you'll notice the typical late 18th century European type is not actually as flared as many people might have thought. So who carried these and why? Very briefly, I've made that fairly clear already. These were predominantly carried by civilians, very often civilians in official roles, so postal carriers, for example, who needed them for self-defense. So these were perhaps most famously carried by postal carriages who were transferring goods, also guards, and also within a military and naval context, they were perhaps occasionally used by army soldiers, but apart from that, most commonly used on board ships. And the reasons are all the same, because this is a small, easily manoeuvrable, easy to get the barrel to bear, difficult for someone to grapple and grab and divert. This is very good in a closed-in space, and it got a pretty big breech to it, so you can put a lot of powder in there, a lot of shot in there, or buckshot, whatever, and it's going to have a big effect at very close range, obviously only with one shot. But the beauty of having a short barrel with that funnel-like end is you can load it fairly easy, especially if you have preloaded cartridges, paper cartridges. Bite the end off, powder down, jam the whole thing in, quickly pull out your short ramrod, bam, 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 ram the thing down. Obviously this is relatively slow. Get your powder out, prime the pan, cock the hammer, close the frizzen, and you're ready to shoot. So although it's not fast by modern standards, it's quite fast by 18th century standards. And by that point, these flint locks had become really really efficient and well made. They've got all the angles right. They've got the hardened steel of the frisson right, so it sparked well. The industry for producing flints was very developed, and particularly in Britain, the powder was really good quality by this point as well. So you're getting quite a lot of energy out of what's fundamentally quite a basic weapon. So, close range, predominantly used by civilians, self-defense, maybe home defense quite often. Also officials like postal workers and people transporting, bank workers and people transporting valuables, but also used, perhaps most famously in a military context, on board ships. So very condensed and quick version of how these were loaded. I've just shown you a quick version. The cartridge goes down the front, or if you load the individual components, powder, then some form of wadding, which can just be paper from the cartridge, then some form of shot or buckshot, and then something on the end. Now this is something which often gets forgotten, but with shot that's super important to put something on the top, because otherwise if you've got a load of shot sitting at the front of your charge and for some reason you lower the muzzle, or you have to aim at something that's lower down, or you want to shoot someone in the legs, then all your shot would fall out. So it's really important to have something to keep that shot or buckshot in, and you can just use the paper from the cartridge. That will be good enough. Anything really, bit of tissue. In terms of the rear, so you need also, powder needs to go into the pan there, a flash in the pan, that's where the expression comes from. The flint strikes that, the sparks come down into the pan. There's a little hole going through into the breech there, that ignites the powder, that's what makes it shoot. So it's all a fairly simple, carefully release this, not abusing the lock. It survived for 200 years, I don't want to damage it. So you'll notice also that this Nubly one is not quite as large caliber and as flared as the Archer one. So they did come in slightly different sizes. They weren't always in standard measurements or anything like that, but you'll notice, as I mentioned about that flare, this type is not particularly flared at all. That is only very slightly wider than the breech, for example. So, right, so that's how you shoot the thing, pretty simple. Could you use this by itself as a hand weapon? You potentially could, however, anybody who has worked with wooden stocked guns for any amount of time will know that this here, known as the wrist, is a weak spot. And the problem is if you hit something with this end, or you even hit something with this end, this is a common point of failure. And in fact, if we look at many antique guns, you will see a repair, a break and a repair around this portion around here. Not only that, not only might it break, but in addition, it's just not a very good bludgeoning weapon because it's not very long, hasn't got very much reach. It's also relatively heavy and slow for its size. So for that reason, we've got this bayonet, okay? So you will notice that the bayonet is completely contained within, it doesn't get in the way at all when it's mounted onto the top of the blunderbuss here. I'll just grab the other one for a second. This has got a slightly stronger spring, and the lever at the back simply captures the tip of the bayonet in there. So when I pull that back, my face is a bit close to do it at the moment, I'll show you in a second. When you pull that back there, all it does is there's a leaf spring in here which is already under tension. And when you pull that back, the leaf spring projects the thing forward, and I'll show you what happens up here. What looks like a foresight, which is not really a foresight, is actually, I mean, you could use it as a foresight, but it's a blunderbuss. It's got a little hole in it there. Okay, let's get it to focus on the actual thing. There we go. And inside here is a catch, and you'll notice there's a spring button there. There we go, and a leaf spring on the side, and that clips onto there, and it's now engaged. It's not the strongest assembly in the world, but it's strong enough for the purposes, I guess. And it does mean that you've now got a really much greater reach and effective hand weapon. Now, why is that important? Well, hopefully my explanation of loading these should have made it clear to you that if you're in close enough range to be using a blunderbuss, that means realistically within 20 yards, okay? So this is really close range. Now, a running person, a charging person, does not take much time to cover 20 yards towards you at all. If they're holding a bayonet or a sword or a club, whatever, a spear, then they're big trouble to you. Now, hooray, if you manage to shoot them, they are probably going down. But what if you miss? What if they don't go down? They take the shot and it kind of wings them. or if there's multiple opponents. So quite simply, you don't have time in this kind of close range scenario. Boom, yes, one shot you think super powerful, you might completely blow someone away, but you've got to then be ready to deal with them in some other way. And that buys you extra time. And of course you could shoot the blunderbuss with the bayonet already out, so that would save you a bit of time. If you know you're going into a combat zone, let's say you were going into a building, an occupied building full of enemies, you would go in at bayonet point, and then if someone did push your muzzle aside so you couldn't get it online, because you can only shoot what's in front of the muzzle, if they managed to get to the side of the gun or grapple with it or push it aside or something like that, at least you could get them off and you can deploy the bayonet, just like with a musket and bayonet. So an incredibly useful thing to have. And they did also mount these on pistols as well, not just these longer weapons. Even though this is an awesome standalone weapon, you've now got the capacity for a very powerful shot at close range, pretty quick reloading if you have the opportunity to, and you've got a very effective hand weapon there as well. Despite that, these people still carried things like this, because at the end of the day this can be grabbed, it can be pushed aside, you might have to end up on the floor, you might need a backup for some reason. So as I've mentioned in so many dozens, perhaps even hundreds of videos over these many years that I've been making videos now, swords, knives, things like this cutto here, this is actually a hunting knife by Prosser. These were still incredibly important weapons at the time, but you put these things together in an 18th century context, and assuming that the predator hasn't come back to hunt you for sport, you are now incredibly well armed. So whether you're a mariner, you know, a smuggler, if you're just a traveller, an adventurer, if you're going on a long journey somewhere, or if you're working for a bank or postal services, anything like this, then this kind of assortment, having a blunderbuss, perhaps even having a pistol or two as well, and a short sword or even a small sword or a back sword, having a sword, a long arm with a bayonet on it, perhaps with pistols as well, which could also have bayonets on them. You are armed to the teeth. These people in the 18th century were some of the best armed people that we've seen in history. Anyway, I hope that's been somewhat interesting and perhaps even educational to some of you. Maybe one day I might get to shoot one of these blunderbusses. I would have to put it on my firearm certificate, because in UK law this would actually class as a pistol because the barrel's too short to qualify as a shotgun. But I do shoot muzzle loading shotguns, so maybe we can look at that at some point, because the loading process is exactly the same. Also in a future video we'll talk more specifically about flintlock and percussion lock, because that's a very important changeover that happens in the second quarter really of the 19th century. But the flintlock from the 17th century and right the way through the 18th century and into the 19th century was the predominant lock. And one of the beauties of it is all you need is a flintstone, and so long as you've got gunpowder you don't need anything else. So even some people in far off lands actually chose flintlock over percussion lock when they first came around, because for percussion lock you need percussion caps, whereas this flint, especially if you know how to nap flint or have access to a bunch of them, will just keep going for a long time. Anyway, blunderbuss, there we go. Never featured on this channel before in all these 12 years that I've been making videos, and I'm sure you'll see them again in future videos as well. Thanks a lot for watching. I have been Matt Easton, I will continue to be. Check out the links down below. Please give me a like. Make sure you're subscribed, because 60% of you aren't, and I hope I'll see you back on the channel really soon. Cheers folks! Thanks for watching. We've got extra videos on Patreon. Please give our Facebook a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Cheers folks!